Well, good afternoon, everyone. It is truly an honor to be here with so many outstanding people. I feel like I've learned more than if I was attending a PhD program. It's absolutely stimulating. One of the things that we talk about a lot with these ideas to action is what really is going to be required to actually make all this happen. And when I think about it, one of the words that we usually use is what we need is leadership. And we often talk about the fact that this is a problem. We don't have enough leaders in government, in business, academia, spiritual leaders. This seems to be this issue. But what I find fascinating is that very few people ever get specific as to what do we really need to become better leaders. How can everybody here become a better leader? And those of us that can influence the next generation of leaders, how does that really happen? So I always describe it to the students that I have very few answers, but like many of us, I have many opinions. And I've tried to keep this simple to realize that from my perspective, there's really four things that can really help each one of us become better leaders. I call them four principles. The first principle, and by far and away, I've come to the conclusion it is the most important, and if we don't get this one down, I don't think we get very far, is what I refer to as self-reflection. Now, even though I don't know many of you, I would guess that most people here have at least 3 or 4 times the number of things to do than you'd like to get done. I don't mean to disappoint anybody this afternoon, but if you think about your career, maybe your family, maybe your spirituality, health, a little bit of exercise, maybe you're realizing we really are here for a flash of an eye and that we really would like to make a difference. We can go on and on. There's a lot of things to do. Now, if you're as driven as most people here are, the conclusion, therefore, is, well, maybe I just need to move faster and faster. I'll just go faster and faster. And we enter the world of multitasking, right? I often realize that coming here from the airport, people are driving, they're texting, they're eating a Big Mac. A couple of guys were actually shaving. There's a lot going on, right? We just go faster and faster. And one of the questions I ask all of you to think about is in this speed, in this race, have we somehow confused activity and productivity? We're unbelievably active. There's no question how active we are. But how productive are we? And the first principle, I believe, of being a real value-based leader is that you take the time to shut off the noise, get away from the gadgets, get off by yourself, and ask yourself a few basic questions. And the type of questions I would encourage all folks that want to be leaders to think about are questions like the following. What are my values? What do I really stand for? What really matters? To the extent that I'm here for a very short period of time, what difference do I make? What example would I like to set? And I think by taking the time to do that, by taking the time to slow down, we start to really differentiate activity and productivity. I think we can start to separate noise from what really, really matters. Now, sometimes I find it helpful to define what something is not. When I say self-reflection, I'm not talking about self-absorption. I'm not talking about spending hours contemplating your navel. I'm talking about really understanding what matters and doing something about it. From values to action, ideas to action. Being brave enough to say somebody has to make a difference. Now, folks will sometimes say, well, can you give me some concrete examples of this? And as I said up front, I have very few answers, okay, but many opinions. Some people are morning people. Some people may want to think about this when they're jogging, taking a walk, commuting. The habit I've been into the last 35 years is to just take 15 minutes a day, not forever. For me, it's usually at the end of the day, and ask myself a few questions. What did I say I was going to do today? What did I actually do? How did I treat people? How did I influence people? How did I lead people? How did I follow people? What am I proud of? What am I not proud of? If I lived today over again, what would I do differently? And if I have tomorrow, and at some point I won't, but if I have tomorrow, and if I'm a learning person, what will I do differently given what I learned today? For me, I find that puts things into perspective. It gives me a holistic view of the role I would like to play and the ability to have an influence on people.
Now, if you think about leadership, many people get very confused because if you really think about it, leadership has nothing to do with control and organizational charts. It has everything to do with the ability to influence people. And I think it's pretty hard to influence people if you can't relate to people. And hard, in my mind, to be able to relate to others if you can't relate to yourself. So I really do believe this really does start with myself. That ability to take the time, I think, really differentiates folks. And once you start to realize, this is what's important to me, this is the difference I want to make, you start to realize, if I can influence people, if I can really know myself and relate to others, I can make an enormous difference. I sometimes wonder, why is it, though, that many of us don't move to action? What stops us? And I think one of the things that occurs, and I see this in many, many organizations, there'll be a group of young people, they'll want to do something, they're all set to go, and then all of a sudden somebody says, well, wait a minute, Harry, hold your excitement here, we have to wait. Because there's a group of people I find in virtually every organization I talk to around the world, and it turns out they almost always have the same name. This group of people we have to wait for always seems to get referred to as those guys. Now, this is an interesting group of people. First of all, it's men and women, okay? But it's this group of people we have to wait for. And a pretty driven person may say, well, okay, but who are those guys? And usually the response is, well, this is going to frustrate you a little bit, but we don't know who they are, okay? That's who we're waiting for. And I think the people that really have thought this through, which I hope includes all of us here, we realize we are those guys. We are the men and women who can make a difference. What are we waiting for? Let's get started and let's make something happen. But I do believe it does take the ability to step back and put things in perspective. And I think in our society today, with Blackberries, Blueberries, iPods, iPads, all of this stuff, it's very, very tempting to say, I'd love to do that, but I just don't have the time. Make the time if you really want to be a leader. So self-reflection. The second principle for me is what I refer to as balance. Having a balanced perspective. And the way I get you to think about this, we could bring up virtually any topic today. And most people have very, very strong opinions, no matter what the topic, very strong opinions. The problem is, most people have a very strong opinion, but have no idea what the other perspectives are. What I used to tell the students is that the second principle is having the ability to take the time to understand the other side of the story. And one Kellogg student said to me, well, does that make the assumption there's only two sides? I said, that's a great point. I'll try never to say the other side. There are multiple sides to the story. And that ability to truly understand, seek to understand before you're understood, that together with self-reflection, I think helps you put this in perspective, helps make this a little simpler, as we talked about earlier. Now, that ability to have a balanced perspective is very helpful to somebody who wants to be a leader, because being somebody who's run a company, it occurred to me early on, I very rarely had the answer. The good news is, if I'm really listening, I may hear the answer when somebody says it. But that's not going to happen if people don't really believe I really want to know. So when you say to somebody, hey, I'm really listening, are you listening enough that the other people actually feel heard? That they really count, that what they're saying really matters? Or as somebody once said, Harry, the last time that person changed their mind was 1983, okay? Do they really want to know what I think? So taking the time to have that balanced perspective, to be able to put it in perspective, has an enormous difference in somebody that wants to be a leader. So we're going to try to be self-reflective. We're going to try to be balanced, which gets me to the third principle, which I think of as having true self-confidence. And some people will say, well, what's the true thing? I mean, you're either self-confident or you're not. What's the true? And I always mention to people, many of us have worked for people who can act very self-confident, who have no self-confidence at all. This is the macho, do what I told you to do, I've never made a mistake crowd. I'm not referring to that. And I would ask each one of you to think through honestly, do you have true self-confidence? Because you're going to need it if you're going to be a leader. And one way to think about this idea of true self-confidence is really to step back and realize, at least in my case, I'm well aware of the fact there'll always be people brighter than I am, more athletic than I am, more articulate than I am, more fill in the blank. However, I'm okay. I know what I know what I don't know, I'm a learning person, and I can get better each and every day. And having that ability to feel comfortable with yourself, I think has an enormous impact on being a leader. Once again, good to describe what it is not. This whole idea of true self-confidence, this is not egotistical, it's not arrogant, it's not obnoxious, nor is it complacent. I'm never good enough. I'm going to get a lot better, all right? Having true self-confidence. And by the way, if you have true self-confidence and you know what you know and you know what you don't know, life works out pretty well because basically you surround yourself with people that are much better than you on the things you're not that good at. This is not a revolutionary new concept, by the way. This team thing is centuries old. The problem is we sometimes get a little egotistical. And what I mean by that is I run into senior people all the time that'll say, Harry, I get the self-reflection. I get the balance, but this true self-confidence, I have a real problem with that one, Harry. I've got 800 people working for me. It is not clear to me I want them to know what I'm not good at. I like to hold my cards close to the vest. I don't know if I want to divulge that. And I'm the one who has to explain. They already know what you're not good at, all right? They've known that. Most of us could write a book on the people that we've worked for of what they're not good at. And that's okay, because if your boss is good at everything, they're not going to need you, right? But you have to know what you're good at and what you're not good at and be able to put it in perspective. Which gets me to the fourth principle, and that is genuine humility. And the way I'd ask you to think about this one is very simple. If I did a survey today and asked each of you here, how did you get to where, we got a lot of very accomplished people here, how did you get to where you are? The two most frequent responses I get virtually anywhere in the world is, Harry, I worked very hard and I've got certain skill sets. And the combination of working hard and skill sets, that's how I got to where I am. Now, both of those sound very reasonable. In my case, I would add several more, okay? In no particular order. One for me was luck. Hello, luck. Let's pause on luck. Second, timing. Being in the right place at the right time. Some people combine those two. Timing was so big for me, I give it its own special category, okay? Third, the team. If I didn't have the teams of people that I was blessed to work with, I never would have become the CEO of a company, right? And the fourth one, a little bit more personal, but for some of us, there's also a spiritual dimension. It's not all about us. There's somebody else running the play. And if any of those four work for you, luck, timing, the team, maybe a spiritual element, maybe several of those, I think what starts to happen to people is you start to realize a couple things. One, I'm not going to forget where I came from because most of us start off with nothing. Okay? I'm going to keep things in perspective. I'm not going to read my own press clippings. If I do read them, I'm not going to believe them. I'm just going to keep centered, right? Because if you think about it, if leadership really has nothing to do with control, and it's the ability to influence by relating to people, most people don't relate to people that are egomaniacs, right? Your ability to truly understand every single person matters. Every single person matters, okay? It's what I refer to as remember the cube. Because most of us, when we started in a cube, whenever that was, we knew how we wanted to be treated. And if we never forget that, if we can remain self-reflective, balanced, have true self-confidence and genuine humility, we can become leaders because I think we'll realize, in fact, we are those guys. The men and women who can make a difference. So let's not talk about it. Let's make it happen. Thank you.